Okay, time for the next one, the giant claw. So, some brief backstory here. I made a list off of a bunch of other lists of like, here are the best bad movies, and here are some really awful movies. And this showed up on that list, on one of those lists. And I had to pick one decade where we did two movies because I couldn't figure out a movie from the 40s or the 30s, and it was just like didn't want to put in the effort, or at least I put in enough
I feel
effort.
like you're being very apologetic. You can't
I
vet
am.
movies without seeing them. And so
This is true, but I'm still, because we both watched it, I am apologizing for us having both watched The Giant Claw. It's not without its merit, and people out there have enjoyed this movie. But I think without, I mean, spoilers, we're spoiling this and any movie we talk about.
you're gonna be shocked.
Shocked.
I want to say though, it made me appreciate crab monsters slightly more because I realized that crab monsters had. I still don't like that movie and don't want to rewatch it, but at least it had a little more imagination than Giant Claw.
I will take it because I like Attack of the Crab Monsters. That's one of the ones I enjoyed. So the Giant Claw showed up on some lists. It's from 1957. I'll do the synopsis because you did the last one. A group of researchers are conducting experiments involved with radar and trying to make sure that the radars are all working really well and can spot all the aircraft. And the pilot, who is in the plane that they're using for these experiments, sees something in the sky. And it's big, and there's a narrator who's talking over everybody and talking about things. And as the movie goes on, we discover that it's a giant bird. It's a big old bird. It looks kind of like a vulture. And then they have to kill it so that it doesn't destroy
It looks like a
things.
vulture or a Muppet.
Yes, it looks like a Muppet. They have to destroy it so that it will stop eating planes and destroying cities. I mean, it only like destroys a building or two, but anyways, and that's the movie. That's what there is to the movie. We could almost just cut our review right there, and it's like that's pretty much what it is.
Yeah.
There's a joke. Mark Kermode. I haven't listened to him recently, the last couple months for whatever reason, but he's like one of my favorite critics, and he says this, and I can't remember where he got it from, but there's this thing in criticism where like somebody asks you, like, well, how was, what was the movie, or like, how was it? And your response is like, well, it was about 85 minutes. Actually, this one was 75. It's about 75 minutes. And I kind of feel like that's my response. Like
I've heard people do that with books, where
yeah,
it's like, how's that book? Or it's even authors, like, what's your book about? 200 pages.
Yeah, like this was about 75 minutes.
Here's an interesting thing I'm reading about it. Apparently, it was also shot partially in Griffith Park. So that was the.
that was
not that there were that many exterior scenes, which was part of the problem with this movie.
Yeah. Well, it also features like 5 actors, and no offense to any of them, but it was just all awful acting, and the dialogue was. Some of the scenes' dialogue actually wasn't terrible, but a lot of it
it wasn't as interesting. Like, this is, so we just talked about Robot Monster, which where the logic and it just kept building these imaginative ideas that went nowhere but were crazy. Whereas this, it's like the bird is indestructible because it's made of antimatter, and no one can see it. So there's like 20-30 minutes devoted to how no one will believe this man seeing it, but then the second half of the movie, everybody's constantly seeing it in the sky. It's a giant bird, like, it just stuff like that.
So I have a few upfront thoughts on this. One is that we forgot to mention this, or I forgot to mention this. There's a bunch of science gobbledygook in Robot Monster. And I kind of wanted to point that out, even specifically because in Giant Claw, there's some more sciencey gobbledygook. And it starts to sound like Star Trek, except that Star Trek is clever and there's usually good reason.
I think they reversed the polarity.
They did in one of
Giant Claw.
Yeah, I can't remember. Sure, they did it here. And so, like, I appreciate, that science gobbledygook. It just doesn't work here, and it works in Star Trek. And then, but in here,
it helps to have LeVar Burton giving most of it,
and Brent Spiner, and it fits and it makes sense and it works in the story. And in here, it's just all science gobbledygook. And what's more is, there's a woman character, and she's our science gobbledygook character, except that the guy who flies the plane can also do some science gobbledygook later. I forget exactly how that
Yeah.
works. But like at first he's making fun of her. Again, you can't win if you're a woman. So it's like Robot Monster and this both had science women in them briefly, momentarily in
But
Robot
this
Monster.
one doesn't get tied up ever.
No, and this one is the woman in this is some like analyst, a data analyst or something. And it's like, that's hey, look, woman in science in the 50s. Except that the movie is like it's for one thing, later she gets kissed by our pilot while she's sleeping, and it's like that's assault. It's not, I mean, let's not. This isn't exactly well. It's not as bad as it could be, I guess, but that's assault, and she's
Oh no,
fine with it because
it's non-consensual.
it's
Not.
non-consensual. It's awful, and so it's like, and she's fine with it, and then she like disappears for the rest of the movie because now the man has taken over and is doing the sciencey gobbledygook. And it's like, yeah, this
That's the
feels like the
weird thing about
50s.
these movies. There's so many science women in these movies, but
Yeah.
it's always if they have an arc, it's either that they are not emotional enough,
Yeah.
which is like, again, that's the women can't win in these circumstances. They always fall for the flyboy who is, they have this like mother knows best kind of relationship with their love interest. It's just
Yeah.
and she's pretty paper thin in this.
Yeah. It's just pretty. I actually don't have a ton to say about this. That was my
I
one.
have stuff to say.
I have one more point to say, and then I'm gonna let you do whatever you want. This suffers from the unfortunate curse that most average, like boring movies, like or somewhere between average and boring movies fall into, which is it's kind of competent in like some of the stuff it's doing. It doesn't make a lot of sense, and it's stupid, and the sets are bad, and the acting's bad, but like it kind of makes sense. It's not off the wheels enough. It's just vaguely competent, mostly boring and dull. And the moment the bird shows up, it's kind of great for a little while, but the bird is only on screen for like, 6 minutes total of runtime. And at a certain point, it gets boring because there's not enough weirdness going on. So, like, it suffers the sin of any truly dull movie, which is it's vaguely competent and not dumb enough or weird enough.
Yeah, I mean, I was comparing this a lot to Robot Monster in that conversation. And so, Robot Monster had all these illogical exteriors. Like, you are almost never interior with Robot Monster. I don't think there are any interiors. This, you're inside most of the time having conversations about what's going on.
Yeah.
Which is what makes it boring. And what makes a lot of these movies boring. It's the equivalent of those ones, I know that Red Letter Media has watched a lot where it's just people on the phone with each other a lot. This is almost that.
Yeah.
What they're talking about isn't interesting, and it's like it's doesn't make the when you write I struggle with writing to keep when I write, I'm working on a novel to make the conflict interesting. And one of the things that happens a lot is you just delay. But like delay isn't an interesting conflict. I can't do this right now is not an interesting story conflict. And it feels like it's not exactly that, but it feels like, well, why can't we destroy it? Well, because it's invincible. Like there's no interesting story to why they can't destroy it. It's just invincible. Well, like I said earlier, the first half of the movie is like no one can see it, but then later they can just see it, and there's no interesting reason why that changed. I mean, the first half it is flying in a spiral over Europe. They should be able to see it. These three people or four, the two generals look like versions of each other. It is so weird. I'm like, are those guys twins? What's happening? There's like four people in charge of stopping this thing, which is like terrorizing the entire planet. And like at one point you're watching, like the experiments are just like watching people do things. There isn't even inane dialogue, and it's just like two of them who are incidentally also the two people who discovered it, who don't believe anyone else when they're like this guy's like, I saw a UFO, and everybody's like, you didn't see a UFO. And then he talks to someone who's like, I saw a giant bird, and he's like, no, you didn't see a giant bird. So there's stuff like that where it's just like frustrating. And it just like it's not interesting. There's no story to it. Like
this is that problem because we talked about it with Robot Monster. Like we like earnest movies and movies that take themselves seriously, but this is almost like a movie that like is trying to be serious and taking itself serious, but it's not this, but it hasn't gone off the rails, so it's just somebody being dull and like
Yeah.
there it doesn't. Not all movies that are earnest and serious work, because this felt earnest and serious to
Yes.
me. It just, that is often what's good about them. In this one, it is like none of it makes sense, and because it's not off the walls, you like want it to make sense because it's not crazy
Yeah.
enough.
And we talked in Robot Monster that, it has the classic sin of the monster on the picture doesn't quite match the monster in the movie.
Yeah.
Well, this movie's called The Giant Claw, and there was nothing about a claw in it. I mean, I assume the bird has claws, and it used those to take the planes down, but it wasn't really a thing. It was more this giant
Bird.
Jabberwocky Henson-looking turkey thing with like whiskers coming out of its head. Well, and there was no particular emphasis on the claw itself, so
there's the farm has a claw that's taken a piece of the farm out, and then at the very end of the movie, the last thing you see of the monster is the claw, and that's about it.
So I was curious, because you've been watching all these Godzilla films, like there was mention. Well, it's interesting though. I feel like the Robot Monster went more into like the world being destroyed by atom bombs and stuff. Like, you didn't feel any historical relevance or any connection to the war or anything beyond just the obvious
this is less
like
connected.
they're military people in this stuff.
Well, this feels less connected to all that for me. Godzilla is 1954, so it's 3 years before this. And Godzilla, I don't know a lot. I need to really learn more, but I think Godzilla basically came out, and even in the US, it was kind of a deal. And this isn't. I mean, King Kong is what from the? Is that from the 40s or the 30s? Shoot, now I have to look up King Kong.
I'll look up King Kong.
You look up King Kong. It's basically
33.
33. So yeah, so King Kong. That there are other monster movies, based off of King Kong being one of the originals, and Godzilla's in the 50s, and that rejuvenates it. As far as I can tell, I'm not a historian. Don't come at me. And this one feels disconnected from anything, and that's a part of why it's probably so boring and dull. Is like the bird. Okay, Big Bird, as I'm going to start calling it, because you called it Big Bird because it looks like a Henson or a Sesame Street.
It looks kind of like the movie The Bird and Jabberwocky. I haven't seen that in a while though.
Yeah, but some other people actually called it Big Bird too. Apparently that's not uncommon. But like, so the big bird it's just a space monster, and weirdly some of the Godzilla movies after Godzilla, like once we lose track of the depending on how connected or disconnected we are from nuclear fear. Your cat is so silly.
She just licked my elbow. It's fine. We're fine.
Depending on how far away or close we are to nuclear fear, like the monsters might just come from outer space for no reason, or they just show up on planet Earth because why not? And like that's kind of like, so that happens in Godzilla, and that's basically what we're doing in the Giant Claw here. But I think it was Kirby who said, or you texted me via Kirby, that like it's a catalyst for nothing.
Yeah,
and it's like
that was him. He gets credit for that.
Yeah, it's a catalyst for nothing, but also it was catalyzed by nothing.
Yeah.
It
came from space and was made of antimatter.
Yeah,
which is not that but like it didn't. There was nothing interesting about that.
Yeah, like it the whole thing
with around like a Pooh Bear walking around Griffith Park. It wasn't.
Yeah, and the whole thing with Godzilla, is that Godzilla is more or less the result of nuclear testing in the original movie.
Well, there is something about Godzilla being Japanese, which is
that too. But that too. There's a lot that goes
from a country where that got bombed.
Yes, and
atomic.
And specifically the origin of the monster, I think, is slightly more complicated. But basically, it involves nuclear stuff. Or we can go to King Kong. In King Kong, which besides being problematic, is mostly an enjoyable movie, but it comes more from our fear of the unknown and the fear of something sort of that comes out of the jungle that we don't understand. Yeah. Which again, there's problematic stuff going on there.
Well, yeah.
That's not what we're here to talk about right now. And that's something too. even though I don't love King Kong, that's something. And again, this bird is just a bird. It's just Big Bird. Are we afraid of aliens? Is that what this is? That doesn't really
Yeah.
feel like what we're doing here.
Yeah.
It's just people trying to solve a problem. And that's could be interesting if they were competent or it looked good or any of that, but it doesn't.
Yeah.
That's
I think
my
that's all I have to say. I was just kind of curious as we watched it because you do like these things if you had any further insight. And
basically
you do.
I think, yeah. I wonder if maybe we couldn't get you more into monster movies if you started to like watch a few more and understand the fact that the monsters all symbolize something. Of course they must, but like,
Foreign invasion. Like,
yeah. So I don't know. Anyways,
yeah.
I don't know. Maybe watch like clips of the bird on YouTube or something. I don't know. Maybe the movie will interest you. I don't know.
It's one of those movies that I would not sell to anyone who is looking to buy that specific flavor of movie.
No, I'm glad that I saw the Muppet that they used. I mean, it's not actually a Muppet. That's probably, I think that's
It's
actually
a marionette. The internet says, Wikipedia
Mm.
says so.
Yeah, it's pretty goofy.
Yeah.